The following is a real recording of a real coaching session. If you're interested in getting some coaching yourself, you can find the link in the description. Thanks and enjoy the video. Anything coming to mind specifically that you wanted to look at this time around? I know we looked at some 3-bet pot stuff last time. Did you want to continue in that vein or go into a sort of a different sort of topic?
Yeah, I think we should probably keep going down that road. I've got a couple of hands from my last session that two worked out well in my favor. One of them not so much, and I'm not entirely sure if I navigated everything the right way. So
Okay, so let's just talk through the specifics of the hands then. In fact, what we can do is we can even run through a little replayer here. So I'm gonna go new hand. All right, so tell me the blind level first.
so we're level 3, so blinds are 300, 600,
Okay.
and we are
Bring in.
sitting at about 45K.
Okay.
One,
And
one,
what position are we gonna be?
this one, I was in the cutoff for this
Okay.
spot.
So hero is gonna be cut off. All right. And stack size wise, what are we looking at in terms of big blinds for most of the stacks at the table?
Everybody was sitting probably around somewhere between 35 and 45. So
Okay, so let's just give everybody else 40K, except for whoever the active player is in the hand.
yeah,
Oops, 40.
yeah, we were all we
40.
were all relatively even. There was no like there was no chip leader. There was no, like nobody had doubled up or anything like that.
Sure,
So
yeah, that's fine.
pretty
Don't really
even.
need to know the specifics if we're just looking at a chip EV hand. So what we're in the cutoff. What other stacks? Like, what are the active stacks here? Was there any specific player that this hand's against?
So this hand was going to be against the under the gun player,
Okay, and they
and
have like 40K. No.
he had about 32, I
Okay,
think, thereabouts.
okay. So we're against under the gun 8. We'll call it. We're in the cutoff. What's our hand?
So we've got King 10 of clubs.
Okay. Seems fair enough. All right. And so tell me the action. Walk me through the action.
So under the gun limps, under the gun plus
Okay.
1 folds, low
Okay.
jack limps,
Hmm.
hijack folds.
So,
And no, sorry, hijack raised.
okay.
Hijack raised 2.2. So he raised to like, I think he raised to like right at,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah.
2,200. Okay.
And
Sure.
I decided to 3-bet to 85.
Okay. Talk me through the 3-bet sizing right here.
I was trying to get the size big enough to I was trying to calculate for the limps. That's something I'm still kind of struggling with is like when there's multiple limpers in front of me, how to size up on
Okay.
on my 3-betting.
Yeah.
So
Think
think this is one of those
ultimately,
ones I wasn't sure if I maybe went too big. I was
yeah, I think it might be a little too big. I think ultimately when there's limps ahead of you, the your raise size certainly has to adapt to the presence of the limpers, but you don't really need to adapt your 3-bet size that much to account for the limpers because it's only creating an extra two big blinds in the pot. And if we look at the action when it comes to you here, there's 4,900 in the pot. If you take out the 2 limpers, there's 3,700. So obviously it does matter. But even if you were taking out the 2 limpers here, the key thing is the price that you're going to be giving the hijack. You're still 3-betting versus this hijack 2.2K. So I think the 8,500 is not a disaster by any means. I think it's just probably, it's not even that big. It's like less than 4x. I think it's probably, I would have gone maybe like between 7,500 and 8K, but I think 8,500, not a disaster by any means, actually, looking at the actual sizing. So I think it's, yeah, maybe a touch big, but I think it's fine. And in terms of the selection of the hand, I think that's good as well. King 10 of clubs is a fine hand to be 3-betting here. Going to be completely reasonable. What's the action now?
so button fold, small blind folds, under the gun calls.
Oh,
So
weird. Okay.
limp called the 3-bet,
Okay.
which
Hmm.
and then low jack and hijack both fold. And
Okay.
so
So what's the flop?
we get off to a pretty dream flop for me. It's king of hearts, 5 of clubs, 2 of clubs.
Okay. So pretty straightforward, pretty simple.
Yep.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about how we're evaluating this spot based on just almost a kind of a 1-to-1 SPR here, really. Let's just kind of bring up the full version of the spot. Let's go just deselect that. Did I just get rid of the hand? What did I just do? Dashboard? No? Okay. This is a hand I looked at earlier. Oh, I thought I saved it. Okay. Maybe I'll have to redo it. Never mind. While I redo the details of the hand. Talk me through how you're kind of evaluating getting to the flop there, like 1-to-1 SPR-ish against this limper who called the 3-bet here.
Yeah, so the limper calling the 3-bet definitely kind of threw me off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Once I got to the and my plan was depending on how the flop comes out, if it comes out favorably for my range or if it comes out favorably for my particular hand, considering that the SPR is pretty close to 1 at this point, I feel like I have a lot of big bets available to me to either get him off or set up a turn jam.
Okay. When we say big bets, how big are we referring to there?
I was thinking on a really favorable flop, I might like B70.
Well, the problem with that is at an SPR of 1, B70 is almost a shove, right?
Right.
That's the whole thing here, right? Like if once I kind of reconfigure the flop here and we go to the flop, it was king of hearts, 5 of clubs, deuce of clubs. And then we're going to, why doesn't it let me add the hand? Because I haven't finished the action yet. Okay, that's why. Okay, just tell me how the action plays out and then we'll finish the hand.
Yeah, so under the gun donk leads
Mhm.
for 5K,
Okay,
which I was like, okay, that seems
very weird.
small.
Yeah, well,
And
we don't have to talk about it through just yet. Just tell me what the action was so I can actually fill out the
yeah,
details of the
so
hand.
he leads 5K, I call, head off to a turn, which comes the 6 of diamonds.
Okay,
He checks, I check,
okay,
and then Dream River's ace of clubs.
okay. And then what happens?
And then he checks.
Okay. And then what do we
And
do?
I jammed because
Sure.
SPR was 1. So I was like, okay, if he's got,
SPR is a lot less than 1. Yeah.
yeah, well, so
So does he call or fold?
he folded. He
Okay,
tank
sure.
folded.
Okay, so we're gonna hit add hand right there. And now we should be able to actually check the hand in the database. There we go. That's what I wanted. Okay. So let's kind of walk through this hand at each step here. We see a limp here. We see another limp. Obviously, we're assigning pretty straightforward sort of passive ranges to those. We see a 3.7x or whatever here. Then we make it 14. And then this under the gun 8 call here. So talk me through, I know, this is obviously way far away from any kind of optimal play here, but talk me through how we're assessing this kind of range. What range do you expect to see from this under the gun player limping and then calling the 3-bet?
I'm expecting to see like relatively high pocket pairs, like maybe tens, jacks, no, nines, tens, jacks, probably just based on the player pool. This is a this is a relatively passive table, and the table's been pretty passive at this
Sure.
point. So that's I'm generally expecting to see a lot of that. A lot of suited aces, ace jack. I'm expecting to see a lot of flat like limp flatting from like ace jack suited, ace 10 suited.
Okay.
Um,
Sure.
I'm not expecting to see a lot of suited connectors. I'm not expecting to see small pocket pairs. Um, I might
Hmm.
see some other suited kings, king queen suited. I might flat here. I'm not really expecting to see a lot of offsuit stuff for the most
Sure.
part.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable.
Um,
So I think we're generally looking at a range that's going to be largely pretty weak on king 5 deuce, right? We're not going to be
yeah,
looking at a range that's very weak on too many boards. The thing that I would probably highlight in terms of what you mentioned just a second ago about bet size here is, like I say, B70 is definitely not an option here, right? Because there's
right.
just too little in the pot. Well, sorry, there's too much in the pot. And B70 is going to leave too little behind on the turn. If you were to bet 25 or 27 here into 36, you're going to leave like 12 bigs behind into a pot of like 70, like it's going to be crazy. So you pretty much have the option here to either go really small and allow yourself to have some options to potentially jam the turn sometimes, or check. So if it's check to you here and you're facing a check, then I think, the size that I would bet here would be like 5 bigs, like maximum, if check two, right? I think that's going to be true with basically my whole range, not just with specifically king 10 or just with a king or anything like that. I'm just going to range bet extremely small here because largely this under the gun 8 player is probably a fish. And when they're a fish and they have a range that is pretty weak on this board, any kind of big bet is mostly going to make life pretty easy for them. We're just going to give them a
Mhm.
lot of easy folds, and we're unlikely to really cause them to make too many mistakes because they just get to fold all their trashy hands. So in this kind of a situation, it is a 3-bet pot, but it's a 3-bet pot where you're playing against kind of a weird range. And even if we were to treat it like a regular 3-bet pot, like if we were to treat it as if under the gun 8 raised and we 3-bet from the cutoff, which is not, completely unrealistic of a sort of way to approach this spot here. The bottom line is that a board like King 5 Deuce, where our strong hands are very strong here, our aces, our ace king, our kings, they don't need any real protection. They're never going to fold here. There's nothing that can ever happen that can cause us to like fold aces. So we just kind of want and need to go small. It's going to be the board textures where we're a little bit more vulnerable that we, might have some incentive to go big. And in particular, a good way to look at these situations, and really this is going to apply to almost all situations, is that generally there are some exceptions, but generally whatever is a 2-street geometric size for the spot, so a 2E spot, we're rarely going to want to bet bigger than that size with more streets left to come. Because if we do bet bigger than 2E, it's going to leave us with kind of a small amount of chips left to be potentially jamming on the turn or jamming on the river and so on. So we're largely going to pretty much cap out our bet sizing at 2E. And there will be some spots where we can go above that. But in a lot of situations, as soon as we're going to go above 2E to where we're kind of cutting down the number of streets to less than 2, ideally, or generally, that means we just shift to shoving, right? So basically here, 2E would be 2E and SPR like 1.2 is, I think, what would it be? Like 8. I think 2E would be like 10 or 11 bigs here. So, 11 would create, or 10 would create a pot of 55.5 on the turn, and we'd be shoving for 30. So actually it would be bigger than 10. It would be like 13, probably. 13 would create a pot of 42-ish on the turn, and we'd be shoving for 26. Oh, no, it's actually even bigger than 13. 2E at this SPR has got to be probably 16 or 17, something in that area. But basically, that's the biggest we can ever bet. There's no bet size in between 16-ish and all in that we can ever use here, because it's going to leave us, like if we bet 20, for example, like the pot is 75 bigs going to the turn and we're shoving for 19. It doesn't make sense. We're shoving for quarter pot on the turn. It's too little to leave behind. That's why I think the small size here would function a bit better. But if we make the assumption here that we're going to go with a small size if checked to, we now have to obviously respond once we see this donk bet. And I think it's quite hard to sort of read into this, right? Because this is clearly a terrible play. And it's also a play that's largely, I think we can make a pretty good assumption that this is not really ever going to come from a super weak hand. And I think it's actually kind of close between just the fact that we have tons of equity, and I think we probably don't expect villain to fold here. And therefore maybe we just get it in right now. Maybe we just shove and just expect to get called off, versus maybe there is a benefit to just calling and continuing to play in position against a player that's clearly going to make some errors. So I think hands that maybe don't have the flush draw, some of the King X, some of the strong hands in our range, the aces and stuff like that, I think maybe we just jam and just make sure that we get called by a king. Just make sure we get max value from a king. But I think when we have the flush draw, I think we're fine just calling. So I kind of like the just call here. I think that's good. Now, what I'm very interested in here is when villain checks this turn, how are you interpreting this checking range? Like, what kind of range are you assigning to villain here?
I'm assigning weak kings and low pocket pair, second pair pocket pairs. Essentially,
Okay,
is kind of where my head goes. It's like, okay,
sure.
so he's got what he might perceive as a weak king. Like he might have me out kicked still, but he might
Hmm.
think like king jack, because I called him and because I was the one to 3-bet. He may assume that I've got a better king than he does, even if he's got something like king jack. So I assume he's probably checking for that, he's probably checking for that reason, or he's got some,
Okay.
or he does have something like jacks or tens,
Yeah.
which, okay, well, that's, if I call, then I'm probably calling with a king so that he's going to shut down
Yeah.
in
I
that
mean,
regard.
I could potentially see that. I think that's, that's definitely not implausible there. I think players will play these hands that way sometimes. What I'm curious about is given that read on that type of range, talk me through the check back here on the turn.
It was more not the right thought process, but it was mostly just like I've got showdown value with my king and I've got the flush draw. So if I can bank the flush draw, maybe I can get called by a better king on the river, or if I make it look bluffy.
Okay.
So it was
Yeah.
more of a just kind of like if he does have a better king and I bank the flush draw, then I bank the flush, then I can get paid off. If it, and if it bricks out, then I still think I can jam a lot of rivers and maybe get him to fold better. So I figured that,
yeah. Okay. Slow down a sec. I
yep,
think we're going way too far down the rabbit hole of trying to predict. We're trying to like be clairvoyant over what villain's going to do on the river, right?
yep,
Because there's like we're saying like on the one hand, when I hit the flush, I can get paid by a worse king, and then on the other hand, like if I don't hit the flush, I can get a worse king to fold. Like
right,
I don't see how those two things can both be happening at the same time. Because
yeah,
on a river card where we don't hit the flush, what does a worse king have to be scared of, right? Like, are we trying to? Is it going to be like a 4 river, and we're going to try to convince him that we have a 3 somehow? Like, it's really tough.
right,
So, I honestly, I think that the mistake of checking here is nothing to do with anything related to like having the worst hand or anything. I think you just misvalue by checking. I think you just can treat this hand like essentially the nuts. You just have so much equity. I think you should just bet 6 big blinds here because I think those jacks and tens pocket pairs, if you bet super small here, they're not folding. They're just not going to fold to a tiny bet. And when the river bricks off, they will occasionally just call off because they're getting such a good price after you bet super small on the turn, right? If you bet 6 bigs here, then he's going to have 25 behind and there's going to be 64 in the pot on the river. He's going to have less than half pot behind. And it's entirely possible that if the river's like a seven of diamonds or something, or maybe that's not enough of a brick, so maybe like a 9 of diamonds. He just has jacks and he's like, well, okay, I guess I call. I hope you have a flush draw. And obviously we don't, right? So I think that what's happening is the SPR is super small at this point. The SPR is like 0.6. And you have to look at any king here as I I have like there's absolutely no way that anything is ever going to happen here that causes me to get away from this against a better king, right? Like if I am against a better king here or any better hand, really, I'm okay with just letting this guy double up 100% of the time because my hand is too good, right? There's just too few hands in villain's range that actually beat us, especially if we're thinking about a better king, considering that stuff like ace, king, king, queen, we don't really know for sure that villains are going to play those hands via limp call anyway.
right.
There's just really, really low frequency that we're actually beat here. And I understand the logic of checking back, but I would prefer the check back a bit more if we thought that there was a possibility that villain is going to bluff it off on certain rivers and we can actually, bluff catch by checking back and get them to stack off in that way. In reality, I think what's happening is villain mostly has some kind of showdown value type hand here. And what that means is that they are going to be very reluctant to stack off on rivers unless we give them a lot of reason to do so. So maybe the small bet jam on a brick river is pretty much the only way we're going to be able to get them to stack off here, I think, with those hands. So I would, I think, call the flop. I can totally understand here with this hand, but I certainly think that betting the turn makes more sense here. But I wouldn't jam because I think jam just gets too many folds, right? I think jam just like, we don't care about him having a better queen because SPR is 0.6. Like, it's whatever. We just get stacked, whatever. When he has jacks or tens, I would be very surprised if he calls a jam here. And I also think we have to account for, jacks or tens is probably not that often in his range here. I think he's more likely to have stuff like sevens, eights, nines, pairs weaker than that. He can have like ace five. Excuse me. Sorry. Excuse me. He can have, pocket fours maybe here, stuff like this, pocket threes. Like there's a lot of stuff here that I think will call a small bet here. And even if they don't call the river, it's fine. It's whatever. I really think that against players like this, you kind of have to grow the pot for them because the chances of him doing a lot of bluff catching on the river are pretty small. And the chances of him being able to look at a 20% of pot bet or less here and fold a pair are also pretty small because people just look at a tiny bet and they're like, well, I can't fold a pair to a tiny bet.
Right.
So I would just bet really small here. And then the river ace, when he checks to us, I totally understand just jamming because it's really hard to do anything else here. But I think part of the problem with the line up until this point is I think this jam gets called so rarely. Like you just,
Yeah.
this is just one of those turn cards where or river cards, sorry, where if you somehow get here with a hand that doesn't have any showdown value, you just bluff 100% of the time and you win basically every time. And then when you actually get here with value, like when you have a flush, when you have ace king, when you have aces, whatever you have that's actually strong just never gets paid. It just against this particular player, I just don't really think that they're actually going to pay off with like king queen here if you jam. But it's also like, what else can you really do? Like you can maybe try to do something like bet 10 bigs here and just get them to like make an annoying call with something weird, like maybe get them to try to punt or something. Like you could do something strange, but in the end, really, I just think that the average like fishy villain is just going to be going, oh, well, I guess this guy has a flush now. And, if we did somehow get here with a bluff, we should always bluff. But problem is he donked the flop and we called. So like what bluffs do we ever really have now? So
Right.
it's just one of these weird situations where you don't really have like a complete range. He doesn't really have a complete range. You just kind of have this hand and you just have to try to figure out like, how do I make money out of it? And I think the best way here is, we bet small on the turn and then on this river we jam, but now we're not jamming for, 60% of pot. We're jamming for maybe 40% of pot and we might get a bit more in the way of calls. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. This is one of those moments where it's like I'm gonna jam and hope he has ace king. Basically, that he was just trying to limp call a 3-bet with ace king off.
Yeah, and that's just super unlikely. I mean, people
Yeah.
do that, but like, yeah, if he, you don't really have to worry about ace king here because if he has ace king, you're going to stack him no matter what. There's just like if you bet small, he's going to jam, or at least he probably will. It's just super low frequency. Like what we care about really is the hands that we would think are the bulk of villains range. So the hands that are the most likely in villains range. And when he donks the flop and checks the turn, a king is a lot less likely. And therefore, we stop caring so much about a king and we start focusing on the stuff that is middle pocket pairs, a 5, a 6, something like this. That's the stuff that we really are paying attention to now. And the stuff that's on the fringes, either the really weak stuff or the really strong stuff, we don't care as much about that stuff.
Yep.
Cool. Let's look at another one. Talk me through the next hand.
Yeah. So blinds are now 1500, 3K.
Okay.
Stacks are all going to be relatively short at this point because it's turbo, so it's
Sure.
like 20-minute
Okay.
levels. I'm sitting at like 90, I think. I'm sitting around 90K.
In what
And
in
that's
what
pretty much
position?
average. Say what?
In what
Oh,
position?
yeah, I'm on the button. No,
Okay.
sorry, small blind. I'm in the small blind for
Plus
this
one
one.
blind. Okay. Hero.
So I'm in the
Okay.
small blind,
And we have
90K.
90K.
Main villain in this hand is gonna be the hijack.
Okay. How
And
much do they have?
he's been on a bit of a stun run, so he's probably sitting on like 150.
Okay. Anybody else in this hand that's actually relevant or not really?
Yeah, let's see, it was me, it was the hijack, and then I think it was the under the gun +1, so 7.
Oh,
And he
okay.
was sitting at like I think he was sitting at like 70, something like that.
Okay.
Like we were the 3 biggest stacks at the table at this point.
Okay. So
Everyone
we'll
else
just
was
give
still
everybody
hovering
like
around like 40 or
50.
50.
Okay. So what about our hand? What do we have?
Ace 5 of spades.
Okay. It's 5 of spades. Oops. Small blind. Ace of spades. 5 of spades. Okay. All right. Talk me through the action.
Let's see. So under the gun folds, under the gun +1 limps,
Okay.
hijack raised to 6K, so min raise,
Okay.
and I 3-bet to 16,
Okay.
and under the gun +1 called, and the hijack called.
Wow. Okay. All right. Let's just quickly go through the post flop action and then we'll come back and talk about the strategy of it. So what's the flop?
Yep. So the flop came ace of diamonds, king of clubs, six of hearts.
Okay, ace king six. And then action was what?
I checked under the gun, +1 checked, hijack, bet 10K.
Okay,
I called under the gun, +1 called.
okay.
And
And
then
turn.
turn was the 10 of diamonds.
Okay. And what happens?
I checked again, under the gun, checked, hijack checked.
Okay,
And we went to what I called a miracle river, 5 of clubs.
okay. And then what?
And I bet 26. I bet
Okay,
26 under the gun, +1 called, and the hijack folded.
okay. Interesting. Let's just have them muck, doesn't matter. Add hand. Okay, so now we go back to database. Go right here. Okay. First things first, we have the under the gun 7 player, or under the gun +1, whatever you want to call it, limps off, 23-ish, 24 big blinds. How are we interpreting that limping range right there?
I'm interpreting it like mid to high offsuit aces. So I'm looking at like ace jack off, ace 10 off, maybe some ace 9 off, and then like some suited, maybe some low suited aces, because these guys don't really these guys would rather limp everything than raise anything. Looking at like maybe king jack offsuit, some low pocket pairs, fours, fives. Might limp a king 10, from that position. He might limp something like king 10 suited, king jack suited,
Okay.
jack
So we've
10
got
suited.
a pretty diverse range, right? We don't have to
Yeah.
necessarily run through every individual combo in the range. We can just say it's a reasonably weak range. It's going to include a few different types of hands. It's maybe a bit heavy on some of those Broadway hands and some pocket pairs, perhaps. And then the hijack comes along and min raises, which is very weird. What do we make of min raising versus this limper here?
Uh, Kind of a very similar range, I would think. Maybe leans more
Okay.
towards the suited, maybe the weaker suited broadways, queen 10, jack 10, king 9, stuff like that.
Okay.
Um, so, and both of these guys they'd been relatively passive just from the standpoint, like they both kind of had built stacks because they were just getting there. So it was
Mm-hmm.
like, it was kind of hard to do. Like nobody was doing anything that was like, oh, that's interesting. It was just a lot of like, yeah, you just keep turning over value. So,
Sure.
and you're getting hit in the face with the deck. Thumbs up. Good for you. Congratulations. Um, so yeah, that's kind of what I was attributing this to. Is like, okay, cool. He's got a lot of like, weaker suited broadways, maybe mid tier pocket pairs. He'll probably be
Mm-hmm.
doing this with like tens, nines, eights, sevens.
Sure.
Um, I figure if he had, again, relatively weak range. Like I'm not expecting to see a lot of ace king suited, aces, kings, queens. I imagine most of the guys in this field, when they have those stronger hands, they'll go bigger with that open size.
Okay. So I think a simple way of kind of boiling that down would be to say that this two big blind open size is a bit more capped than if they had gone with a bigger size.
Yeah,
Now, the next thing that I'm curious about is our 3-bet size. How did we pick this 3-bet size here?
I'll be honest, I wasn't converting to big blinds, so I was just kind of looking at the big numbers, and I'm like, this seems like a big enough number, and
Okay.
kind of went with
So
that.
so how did we arrive at the big enough number?
It was more of a, so I had the big blind still to contend with. We had the limper, and then when the guy just had the min raise, I kind of figured that, okay, well, if I go more than 3, I should be able to get, you know, I was thinking that maybe if I went with like a decent, a middle size 3-bet, maybe that I can push the big blind and the under the gun out of there so that it's just me and the hijack.
Okay. I think you're at this point overcomplicating it quite a bit in
Hmm.
that first and foremost, when it comes to the big blind still has 100% of hands here, right? They have an uncapped range. Well, they have an uncapped range, but they also have the entire deck. So the two players that are in the hand already are much more important than the big blind here because the big blind is not in the hand as of right now. And the big blind has 100% of hands, but this player has maybe 20% of hands and this player has maybe 10, 20% of hands, right? So they both have much narrower ranges than the big blind. So we just don't have to care about the big blind, especially because no matter what here, if we put any chips in as a 3-bet and the big blind shoves, we can't fold. Like, we're just priced in whatever. It doesn't matter what our 3-bet size is. We can't fold to the big blind. So
Right.
that's the first thing. The second thing is that I think you're going a bit too far down the rabbit hole of trying to think about like, oh, what I want to get them to fold this hand. I want to try to create, a spot where like this guy folds and then this guy calls or whatever. Like you're not coming back to basics, which is we're out of position. Most of the time when we 3-bet and we're out of position, we want to create low SPRs post flop. And we want to ensure that the hands in the raising range here are going to have a tough decision versus our 3-bet. And the problem with this size is that whether the under the gun 7 player calls or folds, like that player does have a couple of, maybe kind of annoying decisions here against this size. But regardless of what this player does, the hijack has exactly 0 tough decisions because every single hand that they're min raising here is going to call this 3-bet. Like I can tell you right now, you get 0 folds with this size. Outside of ICM situations where you can apply a lot of pressure to, a player like this, even through a small size from out of position, you really just shouldn't use sizes this small from, a spot like this. I think it would actually be completely fine to jam pre-flop here for 30 bigs, completely fine. There's 5.5 in the pot, I think, when it gets to you. Yeah. So you're jamming for, less than 6 times pot. And that's just not that big of a jam. So I do think jamming would be completely reasonable here. I also think that 3-betting to like 8.5 is a bit more reasonable because then the hijack does have, a few hands that have some slightly tougher spots. But I think against, basically regardless of the formation here, from the small blind, just don't really think we ever want to use this size. And I think you're kind of, like I say, you're going a bit too far down that rabbit hole of trying to like make a very specific thing happen or trying to anticipate a very specific set of responses instead of just like, okay, I'm in the small blind, I'm out of position. Most of the time, if I 3-bet here, I don't really want to play a flop out of position. Therefore, I should go a bit bigger. Just fairly simple like that. So I think the fact that we went really small, it doesn't shock me that we got 2 calls here, because if you do go small like this, that will happen a lot. And then we get an ace king 6 flop. Now, what's quite interesting here is because we went really small and we get called by wider ranges as a result, this is now a really good flop for our range because both these players have ranges that are very, very weak on this board, right? They both have, occasionally they have an ace, sure, whatever. Occasionally they have a king, but they both have a lot of middle card type hands that do not hit this board particularly hard. And neither of them ever has ace king, aces, kings, etc. Right? So they are both very, very weak. And I actually think that it's weird because of the 3-bet size being like not what we want to do, but it wouldn't be completely unreasonable to bet at quite a high frequency here, just because of how good this board is for you and the fact that the SPR is super low anyway. So when you have an ace here, you're just always going to be happy to stack off. There's just no way that you can ever not stack off with an ace here. So it's just ultimately going to come down to how can we, when we do have an ace or when we do have strong hands, how can we get these 2 players to put some money in? And mostly, I think that it should be via doing our betting for ourselves. But if we're going to do that, we have to bet really, really small because we're, again, 3 ways now at an SPR of 1 and SPR of exactly 1 against player 4 against the under the gun 7, and then an SPR of like 1.25 against player 6 against the hijack here. So one way or another, SPR is super low. So I think we should bet like 3 big blinds, 2 big blinds, something like that. Checking is going to be okay as well, but if we check, then it's kind of for the purposes of ensuring that we still have some decently strong hands in our checking range, because a lot of our other checks are going to be like hands with a king, pocket queens, some stuff like that. I don't think we're checking because we're sort of concerned about the strength of our hand. Like we can just treat an ace like the nuts here, basically. Now, We do check. Undergun 7 does check, which doesn't really tell us a lot. I don't think that they really have almost any hands that would ever bet here, so probably doesn't tell us much. And then hijack bets 3.3. So what do we make of the betting range here from the hijack?
I figure he's probably going to be betting. He's going to be betting his aces. He's probably going to be betting his good kings
Well,
also.
let's before we go too far into it, let's be more specific about what the boundaries are of his aces. What aces can he have? What good kings can he have? And for that matter, if he's going to bet a good king, is he trying to value bet? Is he trying to bluff? What is he trying to do there by betting second pair 3 ways here? So first of all, what aces does villain have? What aces are in villain's range?
He's probably got some high suited aces, ace 10, ace jack. I would think that are going
Okay.
to call a small 3-bet that maybe don't want to 4-bet at that point. He's going to have some middle aces, like he might have like ace 7 suited. He might also have ace 5 occasionally. He's probably also going to have, pocket tens, pocket nines, pocket eights, pocket jacks.
Okay.
Some of those things might try to bluff. Maybe.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, I was gonna say
It
slow
was
down.
weird. It was so weird. Like when I checked and the undergun checked, and when the hijack let out, I was like, okay, but I did the 3-betting. So it was definitely one of those moments where it did throw me off. Like I really didn't know what to make of it.
Sure. I think I think what's interesting there is I kind of saw you getting ahead of yourself a little bit again, right? Because we started talking about like the question was like what aces are in his range that he's going to bet, and then
Yep.
you segued straight
Kept
into talking
going.
about pocket tens, pocket nines, like all this stuff, right? So I think when we're trying to narrow down what the value range looks like, we want to be really specific that we're just trying to identify these are the hands that are betting specifically because they're strong hands that are trying to get called by worse, right? And I do agree that there are a decent chunk of aces in villain's range. I think that it's plausible that hands like ace jack, ace 10 can be in there. I think we might have seen a larger pre-flop size than 2 big blinds if they were. It's really hard to know. But one way or the other, we don't have to be super confused about the bet here because we do expect, just in a very broad sense, we expect that when people have good hands and they're last to act, they're going to bet them. Generally speaking, whatever strong hands villain does have here, they're going to bet them. It's probably some of the ace X. There could be some pocket sixes in there at low frequency. Betting a king would be not unrealistic, but it would be probably a mistake from villain here because it's really hard for us to call with worse than a king, and it's not that easy for under the gun 7 to call with worse than a king either. A king is just like a check backhand here, right? But they do bet. They have some bluffs in there. If they are going to have bluffs, it's going to be probably queen jack, jack 10, queen 10, like almost only those hands because people just don't bluff these boards with other hands very often. So I wouldn't expect to see nines or tens really here at all. We can't really easily raise now because we don't really ever get actually called by worse, but we can't fold certainly. So call seems fine. And I think it's also noteworthy here that part of the reason why this hand got confusing is because this is a really good board for us here. And you have a hand that's pretty strong, but you played it kind of unnecessarily passively, right?
Yeah.
And you also used a 3-bet size pre-flop that doesn't really make a lot of sense. And so we ended up in a post-flop spot that should never exist, right? We ended up in a
Right.
post-flop spot where we go small and they both call when in reality, we should never go small. So yeah, I think that's also noteworthy. Now it goes check. Sorry, we call and U7 calls as well. I think we're going to occasionally see an ace there, but we're going to see a king a lot of the time. They're not really going to have too many good hands there at all. We would expect them to raise if they did have anything pretty good. Now we're at an SPR of less than 1. SPR is about 0.5 against U7 here. Turn is a 10 of diamonds. What do we make of that card in terms of, it's kind of hard to estimate which player actually benefits from it more, but is that a good or bad card for our overall range here?
I figured that was a bad card for me.
Yeah,
I
it
figure a
is.
lot of the straight draws are going to call. A lot of stuff with backdoors are probably going to call. So when that card rolls off, that brings in a backdoor, but also completes a straight. I figure that I've just been my hand specifically has just been downgraded kind of again.
Yeah.
Also, it also brings in some 2 pairs
Yeah,
as well.
exactly. I think you nailed most of it there. I do think the one thing I would probably say is there's just not really very many hands that have backdoors here that are going to continue it unless they already have a king. And maybe if they
Mhm.
have a 6, like 6, 7. You certainly, I don't think, are ever going to see like queen nine with a backdoor diamond draw is going to call here. So we can forget about the backdoor. The backdoor isn't really very important. Queen jack is in both players' ranges to some degree, possibly even the offsuit combos, in which case that's definitely a bad thing for us. King 10 is out there. Ace 10 was already ahead of us, but now of course it's, we're drawing dead against it. So it's certainly not a good card for our range. And I think now checking becomes a lot more reasonable, and it does check around, which is nice. So when we get this river 5, I think the important aspect of how we want to look at these river spots here is that we now have a hand that is very likely to be the best hand the vast majority of the time. It's a clear value hand, and we want to think about how we're going to build a strategy here that is going to specifically target certain hands to be able to get some value from them, right? The tricky part of that is that we have an ace in our hand, which means it's quite hard for either of them to have an ace. And the other tricky part of it is when we check call this flop here, with the action being what it is, it's incredibly hard for them to ever perceive us to actually be bluffing on the river here. It's just super, super hard. And so the general rule of thumb for situations where it's very difficult for us to be perceived to be bluffing is that we quite often will do one of two things. We will either, if we have a lot of hands that are, medium strength where they win at showdown fairly often, we'll use a block bet size for some like super thin value. And then we'll induce our opponent to raise or give them some reason to raise sometimes. So here that would be like you bet 4 big blinds, you bet 3 big blinds, something like that. And the other thing that we sometimes will do is that if it is an option or if it is, feasible given the nature of the board texture and the action, is we'll continue using bigger sizes, but we'll have to turn a lot of the weakest made hands in our range into bluffs. And in this spot, that would probably entail turning hands like maybe, I don't know, pocket queens, king, jack, king, queen. If we have those, like we'd have to turn some hand like that into bluffs, which would be pretty difficult to do considering we would have to be confident we'd get an ace to fold. So it's really, really hard to build a strategy here that's actually perceived to have bluffs in it. And it's just quite hard for us to really get called by worse because of how little worse is actually out there. When both players check around on the turn, there just aren't a lot of ace X hands out there. There are almost no king 10s out there. We obviously lose to ace 6. There's not really any king 6 out there. 10-6 isn't really out there. So I'm kind of more in favor of the block bet size here. I'm kind of more in favor of going like 3.5, 4 bigs, because I think that in particular, first of all, you get a little bit of additional value from this player, but you also kind of, in multi-way spots on rivers, those block sizes can be nice because sometimes it actually goes, you bet 4 bigs and it goes call, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you bet 4 bigs and you get called twice, which in terms of EV is kind of the same as you betting 8 bigs and getting called once, right? So it's sort of what you did do here, which is you bet 8.7 bigs. If you had been able to bet 4.5 bigs and get called by both players, particularly like U7 is going to call maybe a lot when he's got a king because he's facing a super small bet. And then hijack might look at that and go, wow, I can't fold. I'm getting such a good price. And now you actually get, you actually get even a little bit more value from that
Right.
small bet because you get called twice. So it's kind of an interesting thing that happens with multi-way. But of course, you also have the opportunity to, maybe some stuff happens where one player just kind of spazzes and shoves here because they just think when you bet super small, you just don't have it. Like you bet 4 bigs and under the gun 7 just decides ace jack is the nuts now and just goes all in. Or you bet 4 bigs and hijack just decides they want to turn king jack into a bluff or something, or some weird, other hand that they could have. So I kind of prefer like a block size here, considering just the nature of the spot. But it is, I think, just a hand where, in terms of an overall takeaway, I would say the main thing here is pre-flop, that 30 bigs in the small blind. One of the things that we're just going to find pretty consistently is that first of all, we're going to be fine with having some shoves in a lot of cases, right? We're going to be fine with just shoving 30 bigs out of position with a hand like ace 5 suited. it's going to be a little bit better with some of the suited broadways because we can actually fold out a lot more, dominating hands. But ace five suited is going to be fine to shove. And then on top of that, if we do decide to three bet, it has to be for a size that puts a bit more pressure on the raising range, right? Now, the limper isn't very important here, but even if it had just been a min raise from the hijack, a min raise open, I think we should three bet to like 7.5 bigs, something like that, instead of the 5.3 that we did go with. So in this case, they made it 6K. I would make it 20, 22 here, right? 21, something like that. 16 just kind of gives them too good of a price. And I think this is just a reasonable rule of thumb for a lot of out of position three bet spots. So we don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole of predicting exact things that could happen or stuff like that. We just want to keep it fairly simple. We're out of position. Most of the hands that we three bet with want to either get it in or they want to play a low SPR out of position. So small three bets just aren't going to help us a ton. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Was there another hand or was it just those two?
Yeah, I had one more that
Okay, go ahead.
kind of an interesting one.
Sure. Let's take a look at it.
We went up to 4K, 8K.
Yep.
At this point, I am on the button with 210.
Okay.
And this is going to be a new player just sat down in the big blind spot, like brand new to the table, and he sits down with like I think like 180. Like
Okay.
I cover, but like barely.
Okay. And I'm gonna give everybody else like 140-ish.
Yeah, and nobody else nobody else really comes into factor. Like somebody's got like the it basically folds around to the hijack raises.
Okay.
And it was again same thing. Min raise, he raised to 16.
Okay, so folds the hijack. Oops. Folds the
And
hijack makes it 16.
Yeah, and I look down at 9, 10 of diamonds
On the button.
on the button.
Okay.
And I three bet to what did I three bet to? I think at this point I was doing really bad math. So I think I had another problem where I three bet too small. I three bet to like 32 or something. I think it was around that.
Oh, okay. Well, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go back to the stack sizes and I'm going to give the hijack a deeper stack because that does matter a lot here. If the hijack only has like 140 to start the hand, then, we probably shouldn't really have very much of a non all-in three bet there.
Yeah.
It's a very shallow stack, but let's say they have 200. They make it 16. We made it 32, you said?
Yeah, I think it was 32. It was either 32 or 38, and I don't quite remember.
Let's go with 38.
I remember
it's like a min raise.
Yeah, I remember thinking, and then Big Blind called the three bet and hijack folded, and I remember thinking as we were going to the flop that I fucked up because I went too small. Like it was like as the flop was coming out, I'm like missed. I know that was too small.
So there's a couple things here. Number one, I think because you're in position here, going small is not a big deal. Your three bet might be very marginally too small, but it's really not a big error at all here, especially because you're at very shallow stacks. In fact, here, if you did go much bigger than this, if you went like 3x here, it would be unnecessary because you're so shallow, right? So that's the first thing. You said you had 10-9 of what suit?
10-9 of diamonds.
Okay, cool. 10-9 of diamonds. So the other thing about pre-flop here is that our hand plays a lot better here as either a flat or a jam. It doesn't play very well as a non-all-in three bet. The reason being that it's exactly the kind of hand that hates getting full bet jammed on. But if it jams, it gets a lot of folds from better hands. And if it flats, we get to play in position on the button here, even though we're quite shallow. So I think for the most part, our three bet at this stack size needs to be very polarized. We need to really be, I know 10-9 suited is a trivial fold if you get shoved on, but we need to be in a position where when we get shoved on, we're confident that we're not giving up the opportunity to potentially realize equity by seeing a flop or be all in. And in this spot, we definitely are giving up that opportunity because 10-9 suited, any suited Broadway here at this stack depth, you either want to be all in pre-flop or you want to be flatting. And you don't want to be three betting and then getting jammed on and then having a really annoying fold to make.
Yep.
So 10-9 suited, I would probably just jam here. Big blind does call. You said, what was the post flop action?
So post flop, we went to the flop, and the flop was Jack of Spades, 9 of Hearts, and I think it was it Deuce of Diamonds? Deuce of Diamonds.
Jack of spades, nine of hearts, deuce of diamonds. Okay. What was the action?
Big blind checked. I think I bet third pot.
Okay. So you bet like 35K.
Yeah, I bet 35.
Okay.
And then he check raised me to 70.
Okay. So he min check raised. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I called.
Okay.
Turn was the 4 of diamonds.
Okay.
And he just lead jams.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we can't fold. I hope he didn't fold. Um,
No,
did you fold?
yeah, I called.
Okay.
It's
Good.
just, it
Yeah.
seemed weird. It just seemed weird. It was just one of
It
those things.
is.
Kind of like
It's
the check raise jam on that. Just, I tanked for a bit because it just was one of those moments where I'm like, I don't know what this is. Like, I definitely took a minute to kind of figure out like, what is this? Like, what's going on here?
Yeah, I mean the check raise on the flop is weird, but I mean when you see weird check raises like that from players that are obviously a fish, considering he cold called a 3-bet off 20 big blinds,
Yeah.
it's just value. Like they just have it. That's it. That's just all you need to look at. You 3-bet here, which again it's not a mistake because it's small. It's a mistake because it's 10-9 suited. And then big blind does call, which whatever, they're a fish, we don't care. We have a few things we can do here. We can check back, which I think is completely reasonable, considering that when the big blind does cold call, there's actually going to be quite a few hands here that flop top pair. There's going to be quite a lot of ace jack, king jack suited, stuff like that. And in particular, our hand, if we do bet and we get check jammed on, it sucks because we have too much equity to fold, but we also are never actually really up against much worse. So check back would be fine. Bet really small would be fine. Like you could honestly bet one big blind here. Bet 1/3 is probably a little big compared to what we need to be betting, because is there really anything in villain's range that has a tough spot against this size? Not really.
Yeah.
In fact, it's not really that easy to pinpoint anything in villain's range that has a tough spot against any size, because most of the hands that they might cold call here are not going to ever fold this flop because there's just a lot of Broadway stuff. So that's kind of why I would lean towards checking back here. We do bet at this point. I mean, I think a pretty good rule of thumb here, considering the amount of chips that are in the pot, is that other than the very, very strong stuff in our range that's just kind of trapping, everything in our range here either wants to just be all in or fold at this point, because there's no longer any real positional advantage when the SPR on the turn is going to be quarter pot. Like when we call, which, I don't think we can fold at this point, but I think we should just be all in. When we do continue here, villain jams and it's literally quarter pot. So no matter what, like literally every single hand that might have continued to this turn has to call now, right? That's kind of the thing that's going on here. It's that on this turn card, really on any blank turn card, that it's not really possible for us to have any hand that calls that flop raise that doesn't have the equity that it needs to call off in this spot, getting basically 5-1, right? So ultimately, that's why we should just be all in on the flop, right? We can jam the flop potentially, but with a 9, it's maybe not that easy to do that. I think maybe we bet small and call off, or we jam the flop versus the raise, or we check back. There's a few things we can do. But, against this 8 big blind jam on the turn, he just has like a jack here, like most of the time. He just has ace jack, king jack, like maybe aces or something weird. But we have a pair and a flush draw facing quarter pot. We can't fold, so we just call.
Yep.
And I don't know what the river is, but I assume that based on the fact that you remembered the hand, it probably didn't go in your favor.
No, it did actually.
Oh, it did. Okay.
He flipped over ace 3 of diamonds. Oh, I was like, all right, that's fine. And the river bricked off it was a black 7. I don't remember exactly what it was. It bricked off, and I was like, one with second pair.
It's obviously a super weird line from villain, but I think the fact that villain can have some hands like that, maybe by just calling the raise, we give them the opportunity to realize some equity. There's going to be certain instances where, let's say we have on the flop, we have king, queen, for example, right? We really benefit from just jamming the flop, because now we might be able to get, if he does have ace 3 and, we manage to get him to fold ace high, like that's kind of a good outcome, right? So
yeah,
I just don't think we really have to try to like navigate and call this click back on the flop when the turn SPR is going to be basically non-existent anyway, because there's no benefit to being in position anymore. It's just all about equity now. And then I think when it comes to the flop bet size, the size probably could be even smaller, but I also think we could find a check. And what's kind of interesting about this hand is when you look at all the spots that we've looked at so far, the common theme between all of them isn't necessarily to do with them being 3-bet pots. It's to do with the SPR being really low, right?
Mhm.
And that I think is the major takeaway here, because it gives us a nice focus area that you can really put some time and energy into. And we can specifically look at some low SPR situations where the idea is, okay, the SPR is like 1.5. I want to make sure that I can play this hand in a way that's still going to be maximizing my edge across, maybe more than one street, maybe not 3 streets, but maybe 2 streets, something like that. And I don't want to be put in a position where I'm either, giving up hands that have way too much equity with a low SPR, or also just not being able to get value from hands that have really good equity at low SPRs. Because I think these low SPR spots are going to come up a ton in MTTs, especially when people are doing weird stuff like cold calling 3-bets and limping pre and then calling a 3-bet and all this sort of weird shit that people do. The low SPR spots come up super often in tournaments as a result of that, and being really good in these spots at just understanding that when the SPR is 1 or 1.5, yes, you can shove the flop, but you absolutely don't have to. And
Mhm.
you certainly still can play more than one street of poker with a very low SPR if you understand that you just aren't going to really be folding any particularly strong hands. And being willing to use those really small bet sizes can really come in handy in certain instances. And you can see that people are still very willing to punt in these situations. So it's definitely meaningful to be able to, be comfortable playing in these spots, because they certainly are going to make a ton of mistakes in these types of lines and these types of situations, right? So I think that's kind of the summary that I would go with here. And I think continuing to look at some low SPR spots would be good going forward. But what I want to do next time is tackle a few situations where we just kind of show you what some of these principles look like in the solver by looking at spots where maybe both players do have kind of more optimal ranges, but we go to the solver and we look at some SPR1, SPR 1.5 kind of spots and just kind of break down what the range construction is going to be like and how we're navigating these spots when we are up against an opponent who maybe isn't making like super fishy decisions and is
Yep.
making kind of reasonable decisions, because that's obviously the next step forward. That makes
Yeah,
sense?
for sure.
Cool. All right. Sounds good. Cool. So that should be good. We'll get back to it next week and we'll tackle some more of these 3-bet pots.
Awesome. Sounds good, man.
All right. Take care.
Alright,
See
see
ya.
you soon.
Bye.
Bye.